Many people arrive at retirement and realize that they have significant time and financial resources. They like the idea of travel and spending time with their family, but are often unsure how to combine these elements. Today, we are excited to host Marti Richardson, a longtime friend and client. Marti prioritized taking each of her grandkids on a special high school graduation trip to invest in her relationship with them. We'll talk with Marti about her priorities and boundaries for those trips, as well as tips that she'd give to people considering prioritizing a special trip with grandkids.
Well, Marti, welcome to the podcast. We're so excited to have you on, and we want to give people who may not know you a little background on who you are. And so I just want to share kind of the trajectory of what you've been able to do over the years and the wisdom, that you've accumulated through these different things. She served as an elementary school teacher for 17 years, and then Marti went on to administration and ultimately was the founding director for the Teachers Training Center in Knoxville and serving there for 24 years. Now, instead of taking retirement easy, I think, Marti, you may have actually, amped it up in retirement as you transitioned over to serve as a consultant and helping churches with their strategic planning and serving as a past board chair of the Learning Forward Foundation. And then now even working with college students through Mission of Hope and helping to lead the prayer ministry, of course, at First Baptist Concord for many years when you lived in Knoxville, and then pivoting and coming down to Huntsville, Alabama. But the thing that we just maybe admire the most of Marti and want to be able to share this with those who are listening would be that she's a remarkable example of teaching, loving, and shepherding the next generation, both within her family and the broader community. So again, welcome to the podcast, Marti.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Well, as we kind of have put together the trajectory of the podcast, one of the things that we come back to so often is helping clients think about living and giving in ways that align, with their core values. And you've shared in the past with us as we've sat down about these trips that you would take with your grandkids, and they were just so powerful as an example of kind of lining up all of those different elements. So how did you come up with the idea, I guess, originally of taking each of your grandkids on a special trip like this?
Well, Spencer, before I can answer your how question, I have to revert back to the question that I try to use to guide me in any life-changing decision that I make, and that's asking the why question. And in doing that, I'm always led to think of at least one platitude my mother used as she instilled values and principles in me at an early age. One of those platitudes is familiar to all, but she altered it from the norm and taught me it's better for the recipient to give than receive. And I later learned that her version had a direct bearing on an Old Testament rule for proportionate giving according to the wealth that one receives from God. And she really started teaching me the basics of the principle by occasionally giving me 10 pennies. We were very poor back then, had very little money. Had me count those pennies back out to her out loud, one by one. Then she said, now take one of those pennies and lay it aside to take to church on Sunday, because that belongs to God. Then she went another step further, and I had to put another penny to the side, and that was my gift to God or others that needed it. And I had 8 left for me. That principle laid the foundational answer for any why question I had in life. It carries over today into the spiritual, the physical, the social, the mental, the intellectual, and the moral areas of my life. And now I've got the basis for answering your how question. So here's my answer. At the time, I offered a graduation travel gift to the oldest of my three grands, knowing that what I did for one, I was going to do for all. Picked something that honored a life value that I hold dear to me, one that was unique to them and their lives, and one that tied into an active interest or goal that they had at that age for their future.
Great. So you were really specific with each of them, kind of seeing their goals and their trajectory, but also wanting to be able to engage with that, something that you were passionate about, it sounds like.
A little selfishly, but yes.
But it sounds like you're broad enough in terms of your interests that wasn't hard with each of the three. Just hearing about the different stories of what you got to do with them, very different trips, but at the same time, sounds like it was very satisfying. Is that fair?
Very, very satisfying. Very rewarding.
Yeah. As you thought about the basics in terms of the way that you presented it to, I guess Laura Kay would have been first, and then Paul and Matthew. How did you sketch it out to them, and what was kind of their feedback when you surfaced it?
Spencer, I actually thought you might ask that question, so I casually posed the why question to the older two last week at a family dinner. I said, "Why do you think I took you on a graduation trip?" And their answers in order: to spend quality time with me. And the other one said, to be with us, not just visit with us. And I got to thinking, bullseye, goals accomplished. But I have to tell you that I've got 4 more points that I had. I wanted to give them an opportunity, the old school teacher, to be part of a living classroom and see the people and pictures in real time that they saw in their books at school. I wanted to focus on the value of family, wanted to give them an in-depth look into their area of interest as they saw it at that time. And for me, the selfish part, I wanted to be a continuing influence on them as they increase in favor and stature, in favor with God and man, anywhere in the world.
So there's a lot more to that than just, hey, let's spend some quality time. Lot more thoughtfulness, and that's the gist of it. Maybe what sums it up, but at the same time, a lot more there in terms of just maturation. It sounds like, really.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. When you think back to originally sketching out what you wanted to do, and again pitching it to them, what kind of boundaries or limitations or kind of scope did you put in place? I mean, when you surfaced it, say to Laura Kay, again, you had some things maybe in the back of your mind that you wanted to be able to achieve, and you wanted to have kind of an alignment of interest, but were there boundaries or limitations that you had that you kind of shared with her at the outset, or how did you go about kind of sketching the opportunity set there?
Each of the 3 children had, at that time, traveled both domestically and foreign with either family or the student ministry at their church, or a really important leadership training program, Student Leadership University. So I really didn't need to lay out any criteria, but I did add one, and this is another selfish part. And I said, your dad or your aunt will be traveling with us, making it a threesome, because when this started, I was a widow. And I would have felt more secure with an adult along. Another added FYI, when my son and daughter were graduated from high school, the main monetary concern of Don and me was just having enough money to pay their tuition to get them at school. And as our wealth level grew to the level that this opportunity now could be presented to the grands, I wanted to go back and provide a similar experience for my daughter and son. So those were some boundaries, and all of the trips turned out varied. They are very different, and turned out to be very enjoyable. Trip number one was a David Jeremiah inspiration travel and tourist trip with Laura Kay and my daughter, flying into Prague and out of Zurich 10 days later. The main feature of the trip was exploring the highlights and beliefs and the relative actions of Martin Luther and John Calvin, seeing the martyrdom sites and seeing the day-long passion play offered every 10 years in German language only in Oberammergau, which we understood completely because of the context and the visual portraying. But this trip was in line with her interest of serving in missions, which she ultimately did by being a missionary in Ethiopia for 4 years and is now serving in a mission trip in her home mission school in her hometown. On the other hand, grandchild two wanted to go to the Junior World Track and Field Championships in Eugene, Oregon. And he had just become the Alabama state champion in the 1A division for both the 1600 and the 3200 millimeter races, and actually had the flu while he was running the 3200, which showed his determination. He was going on a track scholarship to college, and he wanted nothing more in the world than to see these runners from places all over the world. So grandmother sat in the stadium daily, had meals and sightseeing with them, and then she let Dad and son go exploring after they deposited me to my room early at night. And interestingly, he is now the anticipated owner of the top track and field timing organization in the Southeast. Grandchild number three was an avid student of World War II. And his real interest was Auschwitz and Birkenau. So when he said he wanted to go to Krakow, my head started spinning. 1 week later, advertised in the Smithsonian Study Tour booklet was a trip to Krakow, with the feature being Auschwitz and Birkenau. That was a God thing. I booked it. Seeing those two sites had a lasting effect on the outlook of history for all of us. We had extra free time, and we took advantage of that. We saw lectures that had lectures at night on the area and the historical events, which Matthew really got into. But once again, Dad would deposit me back at the hotel, and the two of them would go out and explore. So that was wonderful. So varied trips, but with a purpose that goes back to those principles that we talked about from the very beginning. They're unique. They have interest. You build on that and try to help support them and channel them in the right direction.
Yeah. Wow. So for clarity, your daughter went with you on the first trip with Laura Kay, your granddaughter, and then son went with both of his sons with you. Okay.
With the
great.
other. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful experience. And one of the most surprising things involved the casual conversations that we had then and now. Because our sharing was built on the sites we'd seen, the people involved, the relevant events at the time. And the conversations weren't about beach ball and roller coasters and hot dogs, like the beach trips that we had taken. It almost reminded me of the famous chef Emeril Lagasse. You could say our conversation was kicked up a notch. He talks about kicking food up a notch. So that's the lasting effect that came out of it. And they're involved in those interests today.
Were there things that were surprising in terms of being a little bit more challenging than you might have expected, or were the trips, did they just kind of go off as planned?
I went off as planned because, and this would be advice that I would give to anybody who would like to do this, select an organized tour. I had a history of taking teacher exchange groups to other countries. I knew about organizing travel, but I knew about the logistics and the ins and outs and the problem solving and the et cetera. That way you leave the driving to them. And I would encourage anybody to select that organized tour. Bathe it in prayer first, and God will pop the trip in front of you, just like He did for the Auschwitz trip. For us, I probably never would have even looked at it, even though I'd been to Dachau myself before that. But that to me is very important. And sometimes kiddos, I got to thinking about students that want to take what we call a gap year. Even if they want to take a gap year and travel before they go to college or to work, and the grandparents have a monetary wealth high enough that they want to help in some way, I would still encourage grandparents to go to tour companies that offer this kind of independent opportunities for students. They just have to be minimum age of 18, but there are a lot of really good, type it in your search engine, gap year travel, and you'll get some really good companies that you could go with if you're a novice at doing this kind of thing.
That's great. Anything else that you tell grandparents who are thinking about this idea, or even just parents that maybe their children are getting older and they see the number of years that they'll either be under the roof or in college, with opportunities to travel like this? Anything else that you might tell them in terms of encouragement or other thoughts about why this might be important?
I would say just do it. Don't think about it. Do it for yourselves as much as for your grandchildren. I'm selfish. I've got my memories. Make those memories that are going to pop up in family discussions. It's all about value of the family. And then make sure that it's focused on the child's interest. You're not just going on a cruise and, oh, by the way, we'll take Paul with us. They're worthwhile, but they fall into a different category, and they have different goals and they have different outcomes. So I just say do it.
Yeah, when we think about those different trips, the two trips heading over to Europe would be maybe something that you might expect for someone that's engaged and enjoys history and travel and those kinds of things. But the trip to Oregon would have been quite different there. But it sounds like that really served Paul remarkably well and deepened your relationship with him in maybe some ways that would not have been possible otherwise. Is that fair?
That is fair. Even during that trip, I started calling him my hero.
Mm. Mm.
And that's his nickname to today in the family. What's the hero doing, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a different level of communication, emotional bonding within the family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Did you find that? I guess you were encouraging your grandkids to make the decision about where they're headed, but you're also bringing your son and daughter, along for the various trips. Did you find that they enjoyed the trip as much as say the grandkids, or what was your perception of kind of their engagement with the trip and how much maybe they enjoyed it or such?
There were times when I couldn't figure out which one was the kid. And actually, it was a preliminary event further when I ended up with a life goal of taking my family members to Israel on a Holy Land tour. And so far, I've gotten them all there, but the two grandsons, and one, because of injuries, may not happen, but somehow I'll get the other one there. And I may have to just send him because I'm at an age now where I live with the memories. So,
yeah.
But the Holy Land tour is a must in my book, but I think it follows the others.
Sure. Sure.
And you have to start with the uniqueness of the child. That's the teacher for me. Yeah.
Well, and particularly everything that you did in shepherding kids, for through elementary school, you see that uniqueness in some beautiful ways. Maybe even before there's been a conformity, a push towards conformity that so often it seems like happens around middle school. But anything else that you would share with folks? You talked about engaging with a company that they know the lay of the land, they're good at the logistics, setting everything up. Any other tips from a pro that come to mind?
I can't think of any others when I just select them on the reputation that they have. If you're not familiar with them, have the grandparent ask you, and you can email me, and I'll go, yes, that works, or it doesn't. How's that?
That's kind. That's kind. No, that's so important to have someone. I remember when we were bringing Gabe home and going to China, we had, I think it was my mom's birth date wrong on the plane ticket, and that would have been a disaster. But the travel company made it right, in 30 seconds, and we were still rolling. And then, we got trapped in New York, and they ended up, helping us in some significant ways, when we had bad weather and setting up things. So I definitely echo that our experience has been very similar in the sense that, when you're taking a big trip like that internationally with a lot of people, it's so much easier to do that via a company that knows what they're doing. And even nowadays, we think about the number of people who get bumped from flights, or the connector doesn't go off in the way that we'd expect. And it's one thing if you're one person, but if you're 3 people or 4 people or however many in your party, it's a lot harder to be able to go stand by. So
Well,
great,
yes,
great wisdom.
my first teacher exchange group, 45 people for 3 weeks to Australia.
Wow.
And there's no way that I could have done that without having a telephone number to call in case there was a hiccup.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to have that company there, and they know how, and they do it well.
Yeah, for sure. Well, anything else that you would, any other wisdom that you have to impart? We sure appreciate everything that you've shared here, but any other wisdom that you'd have on, living and giving, via trips with loved ones?
No, I've told you more than I know. How's that?
Great. Well, thanks again so much, Marti, for coming on.
Thank you.
As always, if you have questions or comments, please do leave them in the field there on YouTube, and we'll look forward to catching up with you next time. Thanks.
Thanks, Spencer.
If you like these financial planning videos, please share it with a friend, and if you have questions, go to our website at seriousretirement.com. This content was provided by Retirement Planning Services. We are located in Knoxville, Tennessee. You can visit our website at seriousretirement.com. The information in this recording is intended for general educational and informational purposes only, and should not be construed as investment advisory, financial planning, legal, tax, or other professional advice based on your specific situation. Please consult with your professional advisor before taking any action based on its contents. Advisory services offered through Retirement Planning Services, LLC.